recommendations. What to watch? Hello?
Hello, Raven.
Hi, who's this?
Oh, just a friend. Looking for something to watch.
Yeah, how'd you know?
Do you like movies?
Yeah, I love movies, especially horror. It's my favorite.
Oh, well, what's your favorite scary movie?
That's a tough one. I really like Saw. It's just like so simplistic, but like in a good way, all in one room. I love that kind of thing.
Oh,
But if I had to pick like a franchise, like we're talking like horror icons, I'd have to pick Child's Play.
tell me more.
Specifically Bride of Chucky. Except I don't really know if you can call that one a horror. Like it's not exactly scary. It's anything. If anything, it's more of a dark comedy.
Oh, but what about Scream?
Scream. They're okay, I guess. The first one was good. It was this nice, simple horror satire. I really liked it, but everyone after that, I've seen them all, and they're just so formulaic. And honestly, I'm over it.
I'm sorry you're not into the Scream movies, Raven.
Why?
Because you're in one.
Subscribe to become part of the Hive. Be sure to like and ring the notification bell. Thanks, honeybees. Enjoy the video.
Hi, honeybees. My name is Raven. This is October. That's Jasper, aka Ghostface, and welcome back to our channel. You want to say bye-bye? Say bye. Bye-bye. And go. Bye-bye. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the video. Today, we are going through the Scream franchise. I've done this once before. I made a video on all the Hellraiser movies, and I really enjoyed that video. I really liked making it. It took a really long time, but definitely worth it. So I thought I would do it again because Scream 6 just came out, and previously, before Scream 6, I had only seen the first Scream. I didn't see Scream 5 when it came out, but I didn't see that one because I hadn't seen Scream 2, 3, or 4, and I thought, like, I probably should. I'm sure they are all related, which they are. So I went through all the Scream movies in the course of a couple of days. I watched 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, then 5, and then 2 days later I watched 6. So they're all very fresh in my brain, which is great. I can recap them much better, and I have my fresh opinions on them. Unlike when I did the Hellraiser series, I watched those over the course of a few months. So by the time I made my video, I forgot most of them. So this will be good. Now, before I get started, what I think I'm going to do, the best way to approach this, I'm just going to go through everyone, summarize them, and then do my thoughts on them after each summarization. And then at the end, I'll give a conglomerate opinion on the franchise. But I just want to say, since I'm going through all 6 movies, obviously I'm going to skip over some stuff. I'm going to just talk about what I think is most important, and there might be some major plots that I might skip over or just summarize past. So all you hardcore Scream fans, if there's any of you watching this, don't hate me for that. Obviously, I don't want this to be a 5-hour video. So we're just going to kind of run through the important bits. Mainly being, to me, I think the most important part of every Scream movie is the reveal of Ghostface at the end and why that person chose to be Ghostface. So I think that's probably going to be my main focus for each. It's definitely where my complaints lie about the series. I don't hate Scream. I enjoy Scream. But I do have some problems with it that I didn't think I would have until I sat and watched all 6 of them pretty much in a row. So let's just get started. Enough of my rambling. Scream 1, 1996. Unique for its time, definitely. Obviously, if you're watching this, I'm sure you're familiar with the Scream franchise. If you're not, it's a satire on horror films, but it's a satire that is also a serious horror movie in its own right, a serious scary movie. It was originally supposed to be called Scary Movie, just to play on tropes, but not in a parody way like the actual Scary Movie franchise, where that's just straight up parody and not a real actual film, I guess I would say. Scream is actually a scary movie, but it also definitely plays on those stereotypes and comments on them along the way. You have characters saying things like, oh, we're in a scary movie, so here are the rules, so nobody can have sex, and nobody can drink or you will get murdered, and don't ever say I'll be right back, because then you won't be back. And everyone's kind of like, oh, okay. And so it plays by horror movie rules, and it's aware of that. It's a very self-aware horror movie, which is great. Again, unique, cool idea for the time in 1996. There hadn't really been too many mainstream films like that at the time. It wasn't the first to be done, of course, but since then it really kicked off that specific genre of like movies in a genre commenting on that genre, and not just in the horror universe, but other genres as well. One movie that has come out years since Scream, but amongst the Scream franchise, that movie Cabin in the Woods is a really good one I like, where it's like a real actual movie where like I'm scared watching it and I like it. It gets the adrenaline pumping and it comments on horror movies in like a really cool new way. So Scream 1, good for that, and I'll just run through what it's about. So in Scream 1, there's a girl named Sidney Prescott. She is the main character for most of the film, so get used to her, played by Neve Campbell. Sidney is a high schooler. She's got some friends. Her best friend is Tatum. Tatum is the sister of junior cop in the town. His name is Dewey. We'll get more to him later. So Sidney and Tatum are best friends. Tatum's dating this guy, Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, who I adore. He's great in this movie. I wish he could have been in the other ones. And then Sidney's boyfriend is named Billy Loomis, who will also come up quite a bit in this series as the OG villain. But again, we'll get to that. So, backstory on Sidney. Her mom was killed about a year prior to the events in the film. She lives in this town called Woodsboro. Her mom was killed, and she accused, Sidney accused this guy, Cotton Weary, so her mom's murderer, who she thinks her mom's murderer is currently in prison, and she lives with her dad, and she's still kind of dealing with these feelings. Like, her and Billy are going through some problems because, she's just so depressed over her mom. She's obviously not over it, and he's kind of frustrated with that like he doesn't get like intimacy from her anymore, and that's a whole issue in itself. Oh, she also has this friend named Randy, who's like really sweet and understanding. So all of her friends are like very nice and supportive of her, but Billy's like not the best boyfriend. And then Dewey, who I mentioned before, he's this young cop, Tatum's older brother. He's like 24, 25, and he's kind of on the scene because these murders start happening. The film actually opens. It's a very famous opening, one of the best in the series just because it was the first. And also it's Drew Barrymore, who's amazing. Drew Barrymore as Casey answers the phone while she's making popcorn, and it's this like ominous voice on the phone kind of talking to her, and then he ends up like taunting her, calling her over and over again, and she's like, oh my god, stop. And he's like dropping hints that he like knows where she is, and asks about, that famous line, what's your favorite scary movie? She talks about like Friday the 13th, and so later he's taunting her, and we find out that he's a very real threat and is actually like around her house and ties up her boyfriend in the backyard. She's kind of watching this, and he's like, I'll spare him if you can answer this question. And so he asks her like horror movie related questions. The last one is, who's the villain in Friday the 13th? And she screams, Jason, it's Jason. And he says, no, you're wrong, it's Jason's mother. And so this is obviously like a very like for the horror fans, like with those like details and stuff that like, oh, did you know that this movie's like this, and just about horror movies. And I think that's really cool. Like, they really use horror movies and references throughout in like a way that's not like overplayed, and like horror movie icons, which is great because the Ghostface mask killer became an icon in his own right, and that was cool. Anyway, Casey and her boyfriend get killed right as her parents are getting home, which is like super scary. Like, they could have saved her. But anyway, she went to high school with Sidney and all her friends, so they hear about this. Dewey, the young cop, is kind of in on the case a little bit. And then there's this reporter, Gail Weathers, who is played by Courtney Cox. She's got very invasive reporting methods. She is not super professional. She is going to get the story however she can. She's kind of a bitch. She and Sidney have kind of had a little bit of a history when it came to like her mom's murder and like stuff like that. And so she's getting really invasive on all this stuff and trying to manipulate Dewey, and they kind of like flirt with each other so she can get more of the story on these murders that are happening, because after Casey and her boyfriend get killed, there's a few more killings here and there, and some other people that kind of build up to it. And so they're thinking, oh my god, this is like a pretty big threat. And they're starting to realize, Randy specifically Sydney's friend Randy is a huge horror fan, so he's kind of like saying, oh, this is like he's playing by horror rules, and calling his victims and using this cool voice that ends up becoming like the iconic voice of Ghostface. And it all culminates into this big party that Stu is throwing at his house. And Sydney goes, and Tatum's there, and the whole crew's there. And we get one of the best scenes in the Scream franchise, in my opinion, when Tatum gets killed in the garage going to get beer. She goes down by herself, which is a bad idea. You should never go down anywhere by yourself in a horror movie. Ghostface is there, and she's not taking him seriously. She's like, oh, is this the part where you kill me, Mr. Ghostface? And another iconic line where she says, don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim? Okay, let's see. No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
And then she gets murdered, and she's kind of crushed in the garage door trying to escape, and it's a really cool visual. There's also another like iconic part that gets like referenced in later Scream films where Randy is on the couch watching a horror movie. And before this, he has this whole speech about what not to do in a horror movie. You know, don't drink, don't have sex, don't ever say, I'll be right back, because you won't. And then Stu's kind of like, oh, I'll be right back, and like leaves. And it's this whole great like horror trope speech that the movie is playing by. Randy is sitting on the couch when everyone's in various rooms and watching a horror movie, and he's like, look behind you, why are you so stupid, look behind you. Meanwhile, Ghostface is behind him, and Ghostface kind of attacks everybody at the party. Randy does survive. Meanwhile, Sydney and Billy, they finally like sleep together. Presumably they've slept together before, because I like it's referenced that they've been together a while, but because he says, I want my girlfriend back, because she's been kind of like out of it for like the year since her mom was murdered. So presuming they were together before that, and like things were fine and good, and then she just like has been distant this whole year. So they finally do get intimate again upstairs at this party. And after they're done, Ghostface attacks Billy. Sydney runs away, and then Ghostface comes down, and we find out that Billy is actually the killer, Billy and Stu. And he like faked getting stabbed. It's like ketchup. That's another iconic thing where he's like, ketchup, or cornstarch or something like that, whatever the blood is. This one's the most fuzzy because it was the first one I watched. But anyway, Billy reveals that he was Ghostface the whole time, and he and Stu were using these like voice modulator things to be Ghostface, and she's like, why? And you know, he like baited her into sleeping with him so that she's no longer like the innocent virgin final girl, because that's one of the movie tropes. And he reveals that he and Stu were the ones that killed Sydney's mom, because Sydney's mom was having an affair with Billy's dad, and that caused Billy's mom and dad to split, and Billy's mom like left him and left the family, which is referenced earlier in the film when Sydney's like, my mom like is murdered, you can't expect me to just like bounce back from that and just like be a regular person again, Billy. And Billy's like, well, my mom left the family and I got over it. Obviously he didn't. He took revenge and murdered Sydney's mother, framed Cotton Weary, and that's why Cotton's in jail. And so now, a year later, he's further getting revenge by murdering a bunch of people in Sydney's life to frame Sydney's dad, and is trying to murder Sydney as well, because I guess murdering her mother wasn't enough revenge. He also needs to kill her and a bunch of her friends and frame her dad, because he's still angry about his mom leaving. It's overkill, but you know, that's also going to be a theme, is overkill on the motives. No pun intended. But anyway, and Stu is in on it because he's crazy and likes horror movies, and he's helping out his good buddy Billy. And so Sydney is a fighter, and she's like, they're stabbing each other to try to like be able to frame Sydney's dad, but not kill each other, obviously, so they can like survive, but be like, oh, he stabbed me too. They end up stabbing each other a little bit too much. Stu's losing a little bit more blood. Sydney gets away. She stabs Billy with an umbrella, wearing the ghost face mask, after she was taunting them on the phone while they're kind of bleeding out. Then she has a little final match with Stu and ends with a TV getting smashed on his head, which is super cool. Another kind of like iconic death from the franchise. Then she actually discovers that Randy is still alive after having been shot by Billy previously in one of the scenes. And while they're kind of reconnecting, we get one of those killer's not really dead, come back and comes back to life jump scares. And Billy comes back, and then Gale actually comes through the door and shoots Billy, finally killing him dead. And she was able to be there because earlier during the party scene, early on in the party scene, Gale figures out that this party is going on. Obviously, she's trying to catch the killer, and she has her very intrusive ways that we discussed. So she actually puts a camera into Stu's house, is able to see Ghostface in the house from her media van where she's watching it, and so she decides to come in and intervene and saves the day in the end. Sidney survives. Her dad is fine, doesn't get framed, and Cotton Weary gets released from prison. That's the end of Scream 1. And the only thing I have to say about Scream 1, because I already talked about like how I think it's like unique, I actually really like the first Scream, because if you like don't know what's going to happen, you haven't seen any other movies, you're kind of like, oh, what's going on? The twist that it's the boyfriend Billy is actually really cool and unexpected at the time. Every Scream movie since then, you kind of expect a twist like that, and it's really nice not expecting the twist. That's the whole point of a twist, right? So the fact that they do the same formula pretty much every Scream movie after this makes it not as unique and exciting, in my opinion. A few of them like are good, but it's still kind of like, okay, I know there's gonna be a twist, and therefore I'm not surprised at the twist. You know what I mean? But with Billy, like what I said about the motive, I guess you can excuse it as just like, he's crazy. He's an unstable guy. If you're someone who's willing to like murder, you're probably not like all right in your head, like, or morally, and so like you'll just like kill to kill and it's not a big deal to you. So you can excuse a lot of like the actions of multiple Ghostfaces is just like, they're crazy, which isn't like a good excuse to me. In the first one, sure, but in the ones after this that I'm going to talk about, I'm like, okay, is it just crazy people? I guess, cool, like crazy murder people. But anyway, with Billy, like I said, he already murdered Sidney's mom for his dad cheating with Sidney's mom. So like, I don't know why there needed to be more, why he needed to keep going and murder even more people. I guess he just like had the murder gene, and that was just his excuse to murder. Which, okay, cool, I'll accept that. Again, I feel like it's overkill. I feel like it's too much murder, but we needed the movie, right? We needed to have murders in the movie, and that's the reason why he murdered in the movie. So cool. Awesome. Love it. Skeet Ulrich is great as Billy. I think that's like the best role I've seen him do. Really great. Again, Matthew Lillard, awesome. I wish he could have been in later movies. Luckily, Skeet Ulrich does come back, like as a hallucination, but he's still there, which is great. So Scream 1, cool little movie. I liked it a lot. Still holds up from like being in the 90s. Not every horror movie like does, but it looks really great. It genuinely scares me, like the intro. Before this, I had tried to watch Scream 1 again like 2 Halloweens ago, and I turned it off after the intro because I was just like, this is really scary. Like imagining myself like being home alone and a murderer is just like taunting me, which is probably not going to happen, but it was like, I don't know if it was just Drew Barrymore's acting, but I was like genuinely scared. So that's a good thing for Scream 1. Okay, moving on to Scream 2. That's probably the longest I'll talk about the movies until we get to like 5 and 6. Scream 2, Sidney and her friend Randy, who survived, the horror movie fan as we have established, they're now in college. Sidney's got a new boyfriend. His name is Derek. She also has a new friend group consisting of her best friend Hallie and her boyfriend Derek's best friend Mickey. And like life is going good. Things are fine. Until the murders start happening again. In the intro, okay, so Gale Weathers, the reporter from before, Courtney Cox, writes a book about the Woodsboro murderers. And that book gets adapted into a movie called Stab. So the intro to Scream 2 two characters are going to the early screening of Stab, and it's all these like horror fans, and it's Jada Pinkett Smith and her boyfriend, and the first thing they're talking about how there's like not a lot of people of color in these like horror movies, so it's like a commentary on itself that it's opening with people of color in the intro, and there's more people of color, like more black people specifically in this movie than there was in Scream 1, which there were, I don't think there were any in Scream 1 that I remember. So they fixed that, and then they commented on that in their intro, which I thought was cool. So anyway, she and her boyfriend get murdered by Ghostface at this movie premiere, and it's a really great scene when her boyfriend gets murdered in the bathroom, and then Ghostface poses as her boyfriend because everyone has like Ghostface masks, because the character in Stab is just Ghostface, so they're like handing out masks at the premiere. And he stabs her while she's like watching the movie with tons of people. She goes up to the front and she's like bleeding, and everyone thinks it's like part of the show, until she actually like dies. So the murders are happening again based on, you know, the previous murders. This brings back our characters together. Sidney, Gale, Dewey, and Randy all kind of band together to try to find what they think is a copycat killer. Meanwhile, Cotton Weary has, you know, obviously since been released for the murder of Sidney's mom, whose name is Maureen, by the way, I should mention, because that's going to be important. Sidney's mom. Cotton is trying to like get famous off of his experience of being in jail for a year and kind of have his 15 minutes of fame. So Gale like bombards Sidney with Cotton to like interview them, and Sidney's like, get the fuck out of my face, Gale, you're being annoying again. I thought we were friends when you saved me at the end of the first movie. So that's like a little subplot that's important with Cotton. So meanwhile, the murderers keep happening. We have Sarah Michelle Gellar in this one, and she is in this sorority, and she's like alone in the sorority house while all the other sisters are like partying. She gets a call from Ghostface, and she ends up getting murdered in her sorority house. And her name in this movie is Cece, but her real name is Casey. And so Gale figures out, with Dewey and them, that the new Ghostface is murdering people with the same or similar name as old Ghostface did. So in the beginning, Jada Pinkett Smith's character, her name is like Maureen something, and that's the name of Sidney's mom. Cece, his real name is Casey. Andrew Barrymore's character in the first movie was Casey. One guy has Steve in his name, and that was Casey's boyfriend in the first one. So it all kind of connects. And this leads Randy to suggest that somebody is trying to make a sequel. So taking the Woodsboro Murders as a movie and making their own sequel of it in real life, you know. Which is cool because it's kind of double movies happening. There's the Stab movies based on the real event, and then there's the real event sequel. So they're just making material for the next Stab movie, essentially, which is also a running theme in all of the Scream films. So get used to that idea. Once this is like realized, cops are sent to protect Sidney and her friend Hallie. And after Randy like is kind of like, oh, this is a sequel, so we got to play by sequel rules, and that means like the same people aren't safe anymore, blah blah blah. He gets killed in the van after saying that, like all the people in the original, they're not safe anymore in the sequel, which is also an idea that that happens throughout the Scream films. And so he gets murdered in Gale's media van, which is sad. I really liked Randy, but you know, characters have to be expendable. Not all the likable characters can survive, which is also part of a good horror movie when they're willing to like kill the characters that we like and root for. That's what really makes it scary too, you know, at least to me. So anyway, cops are there to protect Sidney and her friend Hallie, and then the cops end up getting murdered very brutally. And so Sidney and her friend are no longer safe, and her friend gets murdered too. They're like in the cop car, and she's like has to crawl over Ghostface because Ghostface like steals the cop car, and she has to like crawl over him to get out of the car after he crashes and is knocked out for a second. She has to like pull her friend out, and then her friend ends up getting murdered. And then at the same time, okay, so Sidney's kind of like in this sorority or rushing to be in this sorority, and she's like in this like play, and so we see part of her rehearsing it. And at the same time, her boyfriend is like rushing for this fraternity, and as part of a hazing ritual, he like gets all tied up, and then Ghostface finds him and like uses that he's like tied up, almost crucified, and like stabs him on there, and so Derek's dead. Sidney's boyfriend, which is very distressing for Sidney. Of course, everyone close to her is dying again, getting killed, so very traumatic for her. And then we get our Ghostface reveal, and it turns out to be one of Sidney and Derek's friends, Mickey, who we met in the beginning of the movie. He's kind of in it throughout a little bit, but he's not really a main character up until this point. Played by Timothy Olyphant, who looks really good in this movie. Timothy Olyphant, I mean, he's hot when he's old, but he's definitely really hot when he was young. But that's not it, because there's never only one Ghostface. I mean, except for one of the movies, but I'll get to that. So Laurie Metcalf comes in, and Laurie Metcalf plays this kind of, we think she's a reporter. She's appears in and out throughout the movie. I haven't mentioned her yet, but she's kind of bugging Gale this whole time while Gale is like involved in this whole situation, and trying to like report and do these interviews on the murders and with Cotton and all that stuff. Laurie Metcalf's kind of bothering her and being intrusive with her, and Gale's kind of like, fuck off, get away from me, like the whole time. And Laurie Metcalf is like, oh, of course, yeah, whatever, you know. Laurie Metcalf comes in with Gale, like at gunpoint, and Sydney recognizes her immediately because they hadn't interacted yet at this point in the movie. And she's like, Mrs. Loomis? And it turns out Laurie Metcalf is Billy's mother. So Billy's mother and Mickey were working together on this. And the reason Laurie Metcalf is doing this is because she wants to get revenge for Billy's death because Sydney killed Billy. Which I feel like Sydney's allowed to do because Billy tried to kill her and like killed a bunch of their friends and stuff. Like, what was she supposed to just let Billy kill her? Would you have been happy with that? Like, would you have been happy if like she just let him like get caught and now he's in jail for the rest of his life? I feel like she'd probably want to get revenge for that too. Like, I don't feel like that's fair. And that happens like in later movies too, where someone wants to get revenge because like the person killed one of their family members, but said family member tried to kill that person, so it's like self-defense and you're like allowed to do that. I know like as the family member you probably don't feel that way. I don't know, I've never been in that position, but say like my brother tried to kill somebody and in self-defense that person killed my brother, I would be really upset about it, but also I'd be like, well, he shouldn't have tried to kill that person in the first place, you know what I mean? So but that's just me, and you can write it off as her being psychotic as well, and she passed the psychotic genes on to Billy. And another thing, she left Billy and his dad because his dad was having an affair with Sydney's mom, as we recall, but she left the family and she left Billy behind. She did not take Billy with her, so she hadn't seen him for like at least a year, I think it's implied at that point, a while at that point, and that's why Billy was so mad, because his mom left the family because of Sydney's mom. So, like, now she cares, now that Billy's dead. Like, were you ever even planning on, like, seeing him anytime soon or at all? Like, she needed an excuse to kill, I guess. So, psychotic murderers need an excuse to murder, and I guess that was her excuse. Whatever. We needed a motive. We needed a cool twist. So, yeah. So, Mickey ends up getting killed. Laurie Metcalf, like, shoots him. Because his motivation was different. He wanted to, like, make a sequel to the movie. He was, like a crazy movie guy, which is also a recurring theme of, like, Ghostface killers. Someone's getting revenge, but someone wants, like, fame and likes movies, you know? That's usually kind of, like, how it is with the two Ghostface killers. Because there's usually two. And she was like, yeah, I didn't really give a fuck about him. I just needed his help to orchestrate all of this. Really, this is about revenge. It's not about him creating his sequel to the Woodsboro murderers. At this point, they're in this like big confrontation. Gale and Sydney and Mrs. Loomis. And Cotton Weary actually shows up. And Cotton, like I was saying, was like chasing fame after like being involved in this whole ordeal and being wrongfully accused and whatever. So he's there and they're all kind of like arguing, and Sydney's like, oh my God, help. And Cotton's like, well, what are you going to do for me? And Cotton's like, not sure what to do, who to shoot, blah, blah, blah. And Sydney's like, okay, like, fine, if you help me, like, I'll do the interview with you. And so Cotton, like, shoots Laurie Metcalf. He's like, say no more, you know, say less. And so Mrs. Loomis is dead. And as they are leaving, Sydney and Cotton and Gale, who survives again, the cops are all rushing towards Sydney, trying to interview her. Like, oh my God, this happened to you again. What's going on? Like, what? Talk about it. Blah blah blah. Like, getting her more famous. And then she was like, no, go talk to Cotton. He's the hero this time. I didn't do anything. He saved the day. And so Cotton ends up getting his fame that he so wanted, his recognition he so wanted. But now he's the hero. So it all worked out. And the only problem I have with that movie is exactly what I said about the motivation. of our new Ghostface killer, killers, I should say. And that just increasingly becomes a problem for me. I just get like annoyed. I think it's because I apply too much logic to movies where I'm like, yeah, Sydney killed Billy, but not like out of the blue. She didn't want, like, that was her boyfriend. She wouldn't have done that if he didn't do his shit. If he didn't kill all these people, he was literally a serial killer. He killed a bunch of people, attacked her. She killed him in self-defense. There was really no other option. Why are you getting revenge for this? And also, again, like, she left Billy. She left her son. She obviously didn't give a fuck about him. But now, suddenly, I need to get revenge for my son. Like, okay, lady, sure. So that part was a little bit annoying to me. I was like, okay, obviously, like, I don't know if they, like, thought about this in the first movie, what the sequel was going to be like. But they're like, Billy's mom, like, I don't know, maybe, like, Stu's parents, because I don't think we knew much about, like, Stu's parents. No, because at the end of the first movie, Stu said something like, oh, my mom's gonna be so mad at me or whatever. So I'm assuming Stu was closer to his mom, so, like, maybe if she got revenge, she didn't presumably leave the family. I don't know. It didn't quite work for me, but I'm not gonna complain too much about it. Again, I'm trying to apply too much logic where it's not supposed to go. Which, you know what's funny is I watched Scary Movie. I should have watched it after I watched the first Scream again. I actually watched it before. And then watching the first Scream again, the first Scary Movie, makes a lot more sense because at the end, when Cindy's boyfriend turns out to be the killer, she's like, why are you doing this? And he's like, I don't know. Why did the Scream Killers do it? Did that make any sense? Did the end of, I saw her parodying, I Know What You Did Last Summer. He's like, did that movie make any sense? Did the Scream Killers have, like, anyone? No, it didn't make any sense at all. I'm just doing it because I'm doing it. Blah, you know.
Why are you doing this, Bobby?
Why?
Why?
You hear that, Ray? At least you want some motive. Did Scream have a plot? No. Did I Know You Did Last Summer make any sense? Don't think so.
And I didn't realize, like, how true that was until I rewatched these movies again. I was like, yeah, what is the point? You know, what I don't understand why we have to get revenge for this, but, like, okay, cool, yeah, if that's your explanation. I'm just picky. Okay, now we're on to Scream 3, which came out in 2000, so just a couple years later. The intro scene, we open on Cotton Weary, who now has a popular talk show called 100% Cotton, which I thought was cute. He is successful. He's got this, like, beautiful, like, girlfriend and this nice house and this fame that he so wanted. And it wasn't just 15 minutes of fame. He's, like, you know, like a talk show person now, and good for him, you know. And it starts with him and his girlfriend get, like, calls from Ghostface, and Ghostface talking to Cotton is, like, asking him where Sydney is, because I guess Sydney's in hiding now. We don't know where she is, and he doesn't give her up. I don't know if he actually knows, but he kind of, like, doesn't say anything. And then Ghostface is like, well, you're gonna pay for that or whatever, and ends up going to his house, tortures his girlfriend, and, like, messes with her, and uses, like, a voice modulator to copy Cotton's voice. So she thinks that, like, Cotton is, like, chasing her around the house and, like, threatening to kill her because she like can't see him, like, through the doors. So when Cotton rushes home, like, picking up on the fact that Ghostface is after his girlfriend, she, like, attacks him. She, like, is throwing things at him, like, why are you doing this to me? And he's like, I don't understand what's going on. And then the real Ghostface killer comes in and ends up killing both of them, which is sad because I really liked Cotton. I liked his story of, like, being wrongly accused of murder and being in jail to now, like, being a successful talk show host. But, you know, again, you can't be afraid to kill likable characters, otherwise your movie would be boring. So that's the intro scene. So Ghostface is back yet again. Here he is. Someone else is being a copycat killer. So we go into the events of the film, and we're shooting Stab 3. We're on the movie set for Stab 3, the movies that are based off of these events. So this is the third Scream, so they are making the third Stab movie. And Gail is also, like, you know, more successful at this point. She's, like, doing more of her reporting thing. She gets a talk show. I'm not sure if it's this one or the next one where she has a talk show, but she's, like, on her way up with fame as well, like, with all these, like, books and, like, all this stuff that she's been doing. And I didn't mention this, but at the end of the second movie, her and Dewey, it implies that they're, like, together and, like, dating now, but I guess in between the second movie and the third one, they've broken up because Gail goes to Hollywood, where the Stab movie is being filmed, and also where Cotton and his girlfriend were murdered. when she hears about the murders, that someone's copying the Ghostface killings again. And she runs into Dewey because Dewey is actually an advisor on the set of Stab 3, since he was obviously like there during all the previous events. So they get reunited, which is cool. They're kind of like have this on again, off again thing throughout the first 4 movies. So, which I was kind of like, you know, I was kind of like tired of that repeating, like every single movie they get together and break up, or it starts with them breaking up and then they get together at the end, or vice versa, you know. But so at this movie, they're broken up at the beginning. And the Ghostface killer is back and he starts killing the actors who are in the Stab movie based on like the characters that they're playing. So like in the order of when they die in the film. So, or kind of like based on the order of when they die in real life, which is kind of the same order they die in the film. But there's like multiple versions of the movie, so they don't know like which version this specific Ghostface has, and that determines the order of who gets killed. And so they're all kind of like on edge, all these actors. One of the actresses gets murdered, and then all of them kind of like band together, and you know, and Gale and Dewey are trying to help out during this time, and they're all like kind of band together in this house, like, look, we gotta stick together. If anyone goes off, like, you know, you die, and like playing by the rules and whatever. And Ghostface starts like taunting them by like faxing out like pieces of the script that he's like rewriting to like fit what he wants to have happen. And one of the actors kind of like falls for his trick and goes into like read how to like Ghostface notes like which actor will survive. And so he's like, I gotta see how I'm gonna survive. And he goes back into the house because they all like leave. And he goes back into the house and the house blows up and it's like this big like horrible explosion. All the other actors obviously are afraid that they're gonna be next, and they're trying really hard not to fall for these tricks because Ghostface is just really playing with their head. They're like, we can't go outside, that's what he wants. No, he wants us to stay inside, blah blah blah. And all that stuff happening again. That's just like on par for all the Scream films, is like you never know like who or what to trust. So meanwhile, we find out that Sydney is living in seclusion. She is under a fake name. She actually works for a crisis hotline, so it's just over the phone with her fake name, and she's helping like women with like trauma and like going through abuse and like stuff like that, which I think is great. Obviously she can relate, and it's great that she's like, you know, using her past trauma to like help others, and hopefully that's helping her move on as well. But she's kind of forced out of her seclusion when she hears that these murders are happening again, and so she comes down to Hollywood to try to help and figure it out, because she feels like, you know, all the Woods Row murders and everything that's happened since then is kind of like because of her. She's like definitely the central point of it, and somebody in her life is like, you know, it's kind of like you don't exist anymore, like you have this fake name, you don't talk to anybody anymore, like you're losing yourself. And so she decides to get involved again to like put an end to it once and for all. And the director of this Stab movie, Stab 3, his name is Roman. He's throwing a birthday party. So of course we have another big party scene to get all our characters together so we can start plucking them off one by one. So we end up in this party scene, and sorry, I should say before this, Sydney meets up with Randy's sister, Randy, her friend from the previous 2 films, who survived the first one. He was the movie guy, and then he died in the second one. There is a tape by him explaining like the rules of a third movie, and how basically like the last film in a trilogy, or just the third film in a franchise, like rules don't apply anymore, so nobody is safe, including Sydney, which she was never safe, but whatever. Like that's, if we always have to have like a speech about like the rules of whatever number film we are in a franchise, the sequel and the requel and the reboot. It all has different rules, and this is the third one, and the rule in the third one is that nobody is safe anymore, and not that they ever were in the first place, again, but being too picky about that. So anyway, we have that birthday party for Roman. Think that like Roman is killed, he like gets shot. Gale and Dewey show up. Obviously they're there because they know like the big party, that's when murders happen with the Ghostface. So they get captured. Sydney is able to like free them from being captured, but meanwhile she gets captured, and turns out Roman was the Ghostface killer, and he survived because he was wearing a bulletproof vest because he was shot. And his reveal is that Sydney's mother, Maureen, is actually his mother as well, and he and Sydney are half siblings. So Maureen, before she met Sydney's dad and had Sydney, she was like an actor, she was in Hollywood and whatever, and she ended up having like a son who I guess must have been illegitimate, and that was Roman. And then she like put him up for adoption, and then like left to start her, like, you know, to start her new life. She met Sydney's dad, had Sydney. So years later, Roman tries to get in contact with her, and she just like rejects him and is like, I don't want you in my life, which obviously angers Roman. So he decides to start filming Maureen, and he actually captured her affairs on tape. So I guess she was having an affair with Cotton Weary. That's why he was framed. He was able to be framed and was a suspect for her original murder and why he got arrested originally. And then obviously she was having an affair with Billy Loomis's dad. So Roman was able to catch all this on tape. And then he reveals that he's actually the one that showed this evidence to Billy, who like shared it with Stu, and they created their plan. So he was the catalyst for this whole thing, for the original Woodsboro murders. He's the one who like gave Billy the evidence and kind of like pushed him towards murdering Maureen because Roman wanted Maureen dead. So he gathered all this evidence to make Billy do it so he would, you know, be innocent of it. And then he saw like, you know, the cause of this with like Billy killing everybody else and like trying to frame Sidney's dad and all that, and Sidney gaining so much fame from this whole situation of the first movie and the second movie and whatever. He then got jealous of her fame. He got his revenge on Maureen, and I guess probably he thought it was over with, but then he saw all the fame that Sidney gained and wanted that, so he decided to continue the Ghostface legacy himself, and round out this like trilogy situation, which makes sense to me. It makes more sense to me than what happened in the second one, with Mrs. Loomis's motivations, which, you know, because it's the same thing with Overkill with revenge. He wasn't doing it to get revenge on Sidney because Sidney didn't do anything. He wasn't doing it to get further revenge on his mother because she's already dead. He got his revenge on her. He got her killed, right? But then he's also doing it for fame. So he's the only singular ghost killer in the whole franchise, and he wants both things that usually get split up between the two killers. Like I was saying earlier, one usually does it for the fame and one usually does it for revenge. And then later it's a little bit different, but there's usually, you know, but there's always multiple, and Roman's like the only one who's won, and he got his revenge and now he wants the fame, which is interesting. I liked it, you know. I kind of like this reveal a little bit more, like, oh, the secret brother, you didn't even know, I was your brother the whole time. And because we'd seen Roman throughout the movie, he was the director of Stab 3. So this is revealed. It's revealed that he kicked off all of this. So since Sidney was previously able to free Dewey and Gale, they come back onto the scene. And since Roman's wearing a bulletproof vest, Sidney's like, shoot him in the head. So Dewey shoots him in the head. And that's that. And over the course of these events, when Dewey and Gale are reunited, they're like kind of liking each other again. And at the end of this, they end up getting engaged. And Sidney's free of it all. She feels like since like the person that like kicked off all the murders in the first place is now finally dead, and like it's finally like solved in a way that she didn't know it could be solved before, she finally feels free. She finally feels safe. And the whole series gets nice and tied up in a neat little bow. And there's the trilogy, you know? And that was fine. That was good. The only thing that annoyed me, that I'd say actually annoyed me more in the later films, because I didn't realize it was a problem yet in the first three, is that the Ghostface killer is never someone we saw in previous films. Obviously not in the first one. That's why the first one's probably like the best of the original trilogy when it comes to like the twist on who it is. And then like the second one, I already talked at length about why the motivations annoy me. And then in the third one, like the motivation like makes more sense to me. And I like that twist too, but it's also like, you know, it would have been cool if it actually was someone we knew before. That would be a lot more surprising. And I feel like with a twist, a big appeal of a twist is that it like surprises you. And it's just not surprising when everyone is like, you know, it's one of the new characters. Which is still a twist because you don't know which one it is, but you know that it's not anybody that we already knew, which makes it less appealing to me, you know? And I'm going to get more on that later, so I'll expand on that a little bit more later. It's just like part of the formula that we are creating with the Scream movies that the other movies like stick to really hard. This is when it starts to become formulaic for me, like too much so. And I understand that certain franchises, like, you have your formula, you know, like Michael Myers has to kill a babysitter and whatever, and Jason, he's got to kill those camp counselors and whatever, and, you know, there's like the set things for each like horror icon and a set outline for each film in a franchise. But I feel like with Scream, since they're like commenting on that, they could mix it up a little bit, and a big part of those movies is the reveal, and I feel like the stakes of the reveal, like the stakes the stakes kind of stay the same. It's just like the motivations differ and kind of like get bigger and twistier with like who's related to who. But they could play on it more with making it like even more shocking, like, you know, someone who we already knew. It was Dewey. You know what? I'm going to get more into that into the fourth one. So let me just get right into the fourth one. So Scream 4 happens 11 years later. It's 2011. It has been 15 years since the original Woodsboro murders. In the beginning, Sydney, she is actually back in Woodsboro on a book tour, and 2 teens get murdered, 2 teen girls. This intro is interesting because it's like a triple intro. There's like these 2 like teen girls, like classic. They get a call from the Ghostface killer, and they think he's like outside the house, and so they like go out, he's at the door, and then he kills one of them. But then turns out that that was a movie. That was Stab 6, and these 2 other girls, one of whom is Brie Larson, are on the couch watching Stab 6, and these 2 girls get into an argument about how realistic the movie is, and Brie Larson gets really annoyed with her friend who is like questioning the movie and talking about how it's just like stupid, and she stabs her. And then turns out that was also a movie. That was the intro to Stab 7. And then we get to the real teen girls that end up being killed and kicking off the movie. So it's like a movie within the movie. And for a while I was like, is this really it, or was this just layer after layer? But that was cool. That was interesting. It was a twist on the intro within an intro, which I like, which happens again later, which I love when it happens again later, but we'll get to that when we talk about Scream 6. So these 2 girls get murdered, and Sydney happens to be back in town on her book tour during this, and so she is the prime suspect because it's related to, you know, obviously it's another Ghostface killing related to the Stab movies, related to the original Woodsboro murders. So she's accused, and so she can't leave town until the murder is like solved or she can be acquitted. So she ends up staying with her aunt and her young cousin Jill, played by Emma Roberts. And Jill has a couple of friends. She's got her good friend Kirby, who's played by Hayden Panettiere, and she has her friend Olivia. And so while Sydney is like staying with Jill and her aunt, Jill and Kirby are like hanging out in her room, and they get a call from Ghostface, and they see him across the street at Olivia's house, and he kills Olivia. Sydney rushes over, sees like the big murder. Jill comes over. She's like, oh my God, my friend. And then Ghostface attacks them and like attacks Sydney. She's able to like fight him off, ends up cutting Jill deep on the arm, but they both end up getting away and surviving that. Jill has this like ex-boyfriend that like keeps bothering her and like calling her and showing up, so they think like it might be him that's doing this to try to get Jill back. And you know, everyone's starting to get accused because Sydney's been through this before, and Dewey is involved, and now he is the sheriff of the town, and he and Gail have been married for like 10 years at this point. And so they're all like speculating like what's going on here, you know, who could it be? Everyone's obviously like wary of everybody because they know that, you know, it could be anybody. That's like the rules of it. It could be anybody except for anyone who's appeared in a previous film before, but whatever. So anyway, Jill and Sydney end up in the hospital after this ordeal, and Sydney's publicist is like, oh my God, this is so great for you. Like, we're totally, she tries to exploit the whole situation, is like, you're going to get like a 3 or 5 book deal off of this. This is great that this happened. And Sydney's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you know what? You're fired. As soon as she fires her, her publicist gets murdered in the parking garage of the hospital. Which, by the way, parking garages has become a very scary place for me. Not just like this movie, but a lot of like horror stuff happens in parking garages. Like, that's where Leigh Whannell was captured in Saw. And, you know, it's just like a scary open place. But especially when I watched The Sopranos, I think it was like maybe like the 5th or 6th season, the therapist got like assaulted, like horribly assaulted in a parking garage, and she was there by herself. And ever since then, I've just like, I hate being in parking garages by myself. So yeah, this was like, I was like scared during the scene. Obviously I knew she was going to die, but anyway. So yeah, as I mentioned, Dewey and Gail are married now, and they're still in Woodsboro. Dewey is the sheriff, and he has this deputy, her name is Jill, who's like obviously like into him and like butts heads with Gail. Gail wants to be involved. She tries to investigate. Dewey tries to like leave her out of it. But Gail's like, hello, who like literally wrote the book on this situation? Like, it was me. Like, don't try to like tell me not to get involved. Like, I already am involved. So Gail ends up like doing her own investigation. And she knows like about like the movie rules, so she ends up finding these two teenagers who lead like the film club at Jill and the other girls' high school, Robbie and Charlie, and they kind of like go over the rules of like a remake, how this is like a remake. Really, it's a reboot, but they say it's a remake that is just like continuing the original storyline with the original characters, but also bringing in new characters, similar to a requel, which we'll get when we talk about 5 and 6. But they have their like, you know, required Scream movie horror movie rules talk, and this is specifically the rules of a remake. And so Gail's like, okay, yeah, but I know the rules of these killings because I've been through them so many times, and so she knows that like the big gatherings is where Ghostface hits. And Robbie and Charlie are like, well, we're having Stabathon, and then like this big barn, there's going to be a big group of people there, and we're going to marathon all the Stab movies. And I think there's like 6 or 7 at that point because it's so many years later. And so she's like, okay, obviously that's where Ghostface is going to strike. She goes to Stabathon. She sets up all these cameras. And I mentioned this in the first one. I mentioned how Gail was able to come in and help save the day at the end. She was able to save the day because she had set up cameras in Stu's house to record the party, to be able to like report on what was going on. And she ended up catching Ghostface on camera because of that. So she was like watching the feed live, saw that Ghostface was there like killing the kids. And so she was able to come in and save Sydney because she could see that it was happening. So she does the same thing here in the 4th film. She like sets up all these cameras, and then she goes in her car to watch it, and the cameras keep getting like covered and turned over. So obviously like Ghostface like can see that the cameras are there and is finding them. So she goes back in to kind of like readjust the cameras and sees other cameras, and she realizes that Ghostface is filming his own murders. He's making his own movie this time and actually like filming what he's doing. So she gets attacked and she gets stabbed in the shoulder, but she survives, ends up in the hospital. Then after this, there's an after party with Robbie and Charlie, and Kirby is there, and all the other kids. They're there at this after party. There's like a moment between like Charlie and Kirby where they like almost kiss and whatever, and Robbie's there, and Robbie ends up getting murdered by Ghostface. And after Robbie's murdered, Charlie gets captured. He's like tied up in a chair on the deck, like Steve in the first movie, Casey's boyfriend in the intro to the first movie. And so then Kirby is talking to Ghostface on the phone and asking her like horror movie trivia questions, just like in the intro to the first movie. And she answers them, and she answers them all right. And so she actually like goes out and is able to cut Charlie loose, and she's like, oh my god, I can't believe that worked. I'm actually freeing you. And then Charlie stabs her because Charlie was the murderer. He was Ghostface the whole time. But obviously not just him, because Ghostface never works alone, except for the 3rd movie. Turns out that Jill is the other Ghostface killer, Sydney's cousin. So Charlie stabs Kirby in the stomach. She actually does survive, and that's important later. But then they reveal themselves to Sydney and Jill's ex-boyfriend, Trevor, who I mentioned earlier. Trevor's on the scene, and their plan is to frame Trevor for the murderers and the reason for the murders. And the reason that they're doing this is for fame. I mean, like I said, revenge or fame, or both. And for them, it's fame. They're making their own movie. That's always what the Ghostface Killer is doing, is he's making his own movie or continuing from the previous films. So that's Charlie and Jill's plan, and they kill Trevor, and then Charlie's like, okay, like what Billy and Stu do in the first movie, where they like stab each other to make the framing believable, like, oh, we were stabbed, but we survived, you know. And so Charlie's like, okay, Jill, like stab me in the shoulder, I can take it. And she ends up stabbing to kill him, and he dies. And Jill's like, you think I was going to share the fame with you? Which was cool. I mean, kind of happened previously in other movies. Not the first one, but it kind of happened previously in other movies, so it wasn't like super shocking. But still, it's like, oh my god, you know, cool, whatever, I appreciated it. And then Jill, like, stabs Sydney, thinks that Sydney is dead. Well, it appears that Sydney is dead. And so Jill mutilates herself in, like, a fun little scene where she, like, throws herself against a wall, she stabs herself in the shoulder, she slams herself on a glass table. Seemed excessive to me, but you gotta make it believable. I appreciate her commitment to the bit. So her plan is like, she's the new Sydney. She's the survivor now. She gets all the fame. She's gonna write a book, blah, 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 blah. So she's in the hospital and she's talking to Dewey. And she's like, yeah, I can't believe I lived, and maybe Gail can help me write a book about it, and we have matching injuries. We both got stabbed in the shoulder, which is important for later. And Dewey's like, oh, yeah, you're just so lucky to be alive. And Jill's like, yeah, it's just a shame that Sydney couldn't make it. And Dewey's like, well, actually, Sydney's alive. She's in critical condition. She might not make it. It's touch and go, but she's alive. And Jill's like, oh. And so Dewey goes back to Gale, mentions that whole like shoulder comment, and Gale's like, how did she know I get stabbed in the shoulder? And then the realization dawns on them, like she couldn't have known unless she was the one that stabbed her, which she was. So Jill gets up while that's happening and goes to Sydney's room and is like, you couldn't just die, could you? And she starts to have like a fight with Sydney.
Dewey rushes in, trying to break them apart, and then Jill ends up like hitting him over the head with a bedpan until he is knocked out. Gale comes in and she is held at gunpoint by Jill, and then Detective Judy Hicks comes in. It's a whole party now, and protects Gale. They dive behind a bed. Judy gets up to try and stop Jill. Jill shoots her, but while that's happening, Sydney comes up behind her and like shocks her in the head with a defibrillator. She gets knocked out. We think everything's okay, but then of course Jill comes back, because we always have the scene of the killer is not really dead and comes back, and then Sydney finally shoots her in the head.
And so there she is, dead on the ground. Sydney and Gale and Dewey and Judy all survive.
Detective Judy Hicks was wearing a bulletproof vest, so that's how she was able to live.
The big three, Dewey, Gale, and Sydney, all survive. And there's a cool like montage at the end of like all the reporters outside like talking about Jill and basically exactly what she wanted, like a brave little girl, Jill, who's giving us all hope, and she fought everybody off and she survived, because obviously they didn't know yet that she was the real killer. And that's like all that is juxtaposed to Jill like literally dead on the floor, and then the movie ends. And that one, the motivation for that one didn't annoy me as much as really this at this point. It's really just the second one that's annoying me the most for all reasons I previously stated, but I do get annoyed more in the future. So this one was fine. I think at this point, since I watched them all in a row, I think I watched like 1 and 2, and then I watched 3 and 4 like in a 2-day span. So at this point I'm kind of just like over the formula. I'm like, okay, just like there's gonna be a twist. Who's it gonna be? Okay, here it is. I know these people are gonna die, blah blah blah. As soon as Kirby went to go like free Charlie, I was like, obviously she's gonna die. I'm sure it's Charlie now, because there's no way like if he wasn't Ghostface would let her free him. So I kind of like saw it all coming, and it's only because I did watch them all in a row. If I hadn't, then maybe my feelings would be different. Like if I had watched them spaced out as intended, like as they came out, I maybe would have felt different. I was just kind of over it at that point, but not a bad movie. It's fine. I can appreciate it. And again, the motivation was like fine. I mean, it is kind of a lot to like murder, like for a kid to like think of that, but it had been established that Charlie was like a huge horror movie nerd, and it's been established in previous film that it's always like a huge horror movie person and somebody else who's like either a fame chaser or revenge person, you know? And Jill, like, sure, yeah, I believe that, you know, being in Sydney's family and seeing how much fame she got, like how that can be really appealing to a probably already very unstable teenage girl. So yeah, that's the fourth one. That one was fine. Let's move right on to the fifth one. I really don't have a whole lot more to say about the fourth one. Like that's my commentary on it. It was fine. It was good for reboot, not really a remake, but a reboot. Original characters continuing the original storyline. Cool. I feel really bad for Sydney that she never knows when this is going to happen. It could be next year. It could be 10 years from now. It could be 15 years from now. But Ghostface always comes back in her life, and I feel really bad for her. But anyway, skipping right to Scream 5, which is from 2022, just last year. So I originally thought it was just going to be like a straight up remake, like an actual remake. But it turns out to be a requel, which really the fourth was also a requel, which is just like a continuation, but just like adding new characters, which is really what all the Scream movies have been at that point, except our original characters aren't really... They're still the main characters, but then there's new characters who you could also call main characters. It's just, it's all the same. It's all a requel, really, if we're gonna call it something. And we have not had a remake yet at this point. So this one, Scream, aka Scream 5, takes place 25 years after the Woodsboro killings. We are back in Woodsboro. The intro is with Jenna Ortega. She gets that call from Ghostface. What's your favorite scary movie? I think she says The Babadook, which is a fun answer. And she's like, yeah, I like the ones that like make you think. I don't just like the slashers and whatever, which is fun. That's like something I would say. I did some similar to what I said in the intro to this video. So she gets attacked by Ghostface. She like breaks her ankle. She gets stabbed a bunch of times, but she survives and she ends up in the hospital. And this prompts her estranged older sister Sam to come back to Woodsboro. She had moved to to Modesto, California, and so she goes back to Woodsboro, and she takes her boyfriend Richie, who I don't know if it's mentioned exactly how long they've been dating, but long enough for him to be like a serious boyfriend and like come with her on this trip. So they go and see her, and Sam reunites with her sister Tara and Tara's friends, who she like previously babysat, so she knew all them. And Tara's friends are Wes, played by Dylan O'Brien, I believe. And Wes is actually Judy, Deputy Judy from the previous film, Judy Hicks. Wes is her son, and Judy is the sheriff now. And her other friends, Chad and Mindy, who are twins, and they are actually her friend Randy from the first two movies, Randy's niece and nephew. So Randy's sister, who we met in the third one, her kids. So everyone's like related to previous characters in one way or another, except for our other two, Liv, who is Chad's girlfriend, and Amber, just one of their other friends. And I should mention in the intro, when Jenna Ortega is talking to Ghostface, I'll just call her Tara. When Tara's talking to Ghostface, he's like showing footage of Amber and like threatening to like kill Amber. And so she ends up like rushing outside to try to go and like get to Amber, and then Ghostface ambushes her outside. So he was like tricking her by showing her like previously recorded video of Amber. So Amber was kind of used as bait. So yeah, Tara gets attacked by Ghostface, and then Liv, her ex-boyfriend Vince, who's like he's like bothering her, and like Chad and their friends like, hey Liv, don't you miss being with a real man? And they're all in like, I think it's like a bowling alley or a restaurant or something, and he's like bothering them, and he goes outside and he gets killed by Ghostface. So everyone is aware of Ghostface now, that someone is back and killing people. So Sam, and we find out, she reveals this to Tara, that she is actually Billy Loomis's daughter. Tara's dad, her and Tara's dad is not actually Sam's dad. And she found this out like years prior. That's actually the reason that she left and that they're estranged now, because Sam found a bunch of her and Tara's mom's diaries from when she was in high school, and their mom was pregnant with Sam in high school, so she's like, oh, I want to see like, you know, when she was getting with dad and like when she found out she was pregnant and whatever. And it turns out she found out through the diaries that her mom was in love with Billy Loomis and ended up like cheating on her boyfriend, who she thought was her dad, with Billy, and getting pregnant and saying it was her boyfriend's kid. And so they ended up getting engaged, and she just like never told him, and that's who Sam thought her dad was all these years, and who's Tara's dad. And so she hallucinates Billy, because she inherited some of his psychosis, which we know runs in the family because his mother was also crazy. And so she hallucinates Billy, and it's actually Scoot Aldrich is back, and he's in his like bloody white t-shirt, looking just like how we left him in the first movie, except older now. And he's like trying to convince her to like give in to her murderous ancestry or whatever. And so she reveals this to Tara, like, Billy Loomis is actually my father, not dad. And I told mom this, and dad overheard. He didn't know, so he ended up like leaving mom, and like it's all my fault that our family fell apart. And so that's why I left. And Tara gets mad at her, like, why didn't you tell me? You just left me there. Like, get out. And she's like upset. Then Sam and Richie go to meet up with Dewey, who is no longer a cop. He's a sad, divorced man. He and Gail have gotten divorced. We don't know exactly how long they've been divorced for, but he does mention that it's been a few years since they've spoken. And she, at this point, does have her talk show, and he's, like, watching her. And so they go to him, and he's, like, talking about, he's the one who gives, like, the speech about the rules of the movie, and never trust the love interest, and never do this, and on all these things. And so Sam is kind of starting to be wary of everybody. Like, it could be anybody. Somebody knows my secret about Billy being my father, and they're, like, out to get me and my family for it. So she's kind of the new Sydney in a way. But actually I said, you know, Dewey gave the rules, but really Mindy is the movie person. So Dewey is like giving the rules that he's learned from his previous experiences with these killings. And then Mindy, one of the twins and Tara's friend, is the one who's like giving out the rules. And she's the one who's like, yeah, this is a requel, which is a continued narrative derived from the original plot, which is also what the fourth one was, but they called it a remake. Whatever. It's fine. We'll move on. So she's the one who's like, she's like the new Randy, which makes sense because she's Randy's niece. And I like that. I like that kind of like they're taking on like the traits of like the previous characters, which is actually, you know, I think it's a cool concept. Because now it's like everybody's like kids and nieces and nephews and stuff. Speaking of which, unfortunately, Wes ends up getting murdered, and Ghostface calls Judy and is like, I'm gonna kill your baby boy. And she's like, no, don't, he's a good kid. It's obvious that Judy like loves her son. She loves her son so much, like that's her baby boy. And so she goes and she tries to run into her house, and as she's running into her house, Ghostface kills her and then kills Wes. And so they're both dead, which rules of the requel, the legacy characters are now expendable. So Judy ends up dying, which is sad. So while all this is going on, now that the body count is rising, Gail's back in town to report on them, to like investigate / report on the murders, because, you know, now that she's famous with her big talk show, but this was her bread and butter, you know, this is what got her started. So of course she's going to come back. She's back and she's like talking with Dewey, who's like also getting involved again. I said he wasn't still a cop, but he's like kind of still involved in it. He's just like not the sheriff anymore. And she's like, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me? And he's like, we're divorced. We haven't talked in years. Like, why would I call you? But anyway, meanwhile, back at the hospital, Tara and Richie are there, and Tara and Richie both get attacked by Ghostface, and Tara's like trying to get away, but she's like in her wheelchair, and she got stabbed like through the hand in the intro, which was pretty brutal. And so she's trying to wheel with her hand, and it's like bleeding. And Sam and Dewey come in to save the day and get Tara and Richie out of there, and then Dewey ends up getting murdered by Ghostface, which is also very sad. But like they had previously established, like the legacy characters no longer matter now that they have like new main characters to follow, which does make this one more of a requel reboot than the previous one, because in the previous one, like the main characters from the previous movies still like the legacy characters still survived and ended up killing like the new main characters. So this one did it differently than the fourth one, so it wasn't really the same. So Dewey's dead. Sam takes Tara and Richie and is like, we got to get out of town. Tara realizes she doesn't have her inhaler, and they have to stop by Amber's house to get it. And Amber just so happens to be having a party. So they walk in to try to find Tara's inhaler, and there's a whole big party going on. And of course, that's where the bodies drop again. So at this party, Chad goes out to look for Liv, and he gets attacked. Mindy gets attacked. There's like this fun little scene where one of them like goes into the basement, and then Mindy falls and is like, you shouldn't have gone down here alone. And she's like, well, what if I'm the murderer? And Mindy's like, I know you're not the murderer because I am. She's like, just playing. But it's fun how they like play with it more in this movie, how like it literally could be anybody, because at this point I was like, I know obviously it's not going to be like Gail or Sydney or anything, but it's one of these characters and I don't know who it is. Like, I wonder who it is, you know? They could all be it, but you know, obviously we won't know until the reveal what the motivation would be. But that little scene was fun for that reason, because I was like, oh, what if it is them? And I was totally expecting one of them to be killed during that scene, but neither of them did, which was kind of a fun little twist in itself. Like, actually a murder didn't happen in this scene. You totally thought it was. But Mindy gets attacked anyway. She parallels Randy's scene in the original where she's like watching a movie and she's like, look out, don't go in there, don't do this. And then Ghostface is like behind her and she gets attacked. And so like this is all happening, and then out of the blue, Amber ends up shooting Liv in the head and reveals herself as Ghostface. So it was Amber the whole time. So the previous footage of her that was used in the intro, like she like set that up to attack Tara in the intro. So that was a cool little wraparound, because you wouldn't have thought that, because Amber seemed to be bait, but she set it up. But not just Amber, because it's never just one person, except for the third one. It's also Richie, Sam's boyfriend, and which Dewey warned her about. Never trust the love interest. He literally said it, and he was right. So turns out Richie and Amber were like in on it together. Richie, I mean, Sam's like in her early 20s and like Tara and her friends are like teenagers, but Richie and Amber are like together, I guess, and plan this together. But like Amber's like a teenager and he's like in his early 20s, which is like weird, but I guess that's the least of our problems here. And so he went and like, he reveals that he went and like found Sam and like dated her under false pretenses just to get her back to Woodsboro. And he's the one who took Tara's inhaler so that they would have to go to Amber's house to look for it. And so really it was this whole like elaborate setup to bring back the original cast to make material for another Stab movie. Because I guess part of the motivation is they didn't like how there's like 7 Stab movies at this point. They didn't like how the 7th one turned out. So they want to get all the original people together so they have material to make a better one. Because I think they had mentioned that all the Stab movies 1 through 6 were based off the Woodsboro murders with Sidney. And then like in the 7th one, Sidney was like, don't make movies about me anymore. So they made something different. And I guess like Richie and Amber were big fans of that. Specifically Richie, we find out later, was a huge fan of the Stab movies. And Richie didn't like how it turned out. So he's like, I'm going to make my own movie. And that's his whole motivation, is he wants to make his own movie. So he and Amber did all this because of that. And their plan was to frame Sam because she's Billy Loomis's daughter, and they found out that she was Billy Loomis's daughter. I don't remember how, but they found out. And so like that makes a really good like ghost face, like a really cool reveal. It turned out it was you giving into your like psychosis, giving into your like psychotic genes from your father, and you just like went crazy and stabbed a bunch of people. So that's their story that they want. Sidney does end up showing up. Gale calls her, and Sidney and Gale go in and they like walk up to the house, and Amber comes out and is like, like pretending like she's not Ghostface, and Sidney and Gale don't fall for it, so they all have a fight together. And so they fight Amber, and they're like stabbing and shooting each other, and they end up shooting Amber and like burning her on the stove, so she's like on fire, which is great. And Amber keeps doing this thing when she doesn't have the upper hand, where she's like, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing, and she gets the upper hand, she's like, just kidding. And then she doesn't have it again. She's like, I'm so sorry about Dewey. I didn't mean to kill him. And Gale's like, fuck off, like, with your wishy-washy ass. And so she gets caught on fire. So during this time with Sam's confrontation with Richie, she sees her hallucination of Billy, who's like, do it, Sam. Give into it. You know you want to. Embrace your inner killer. And she stabs Richie a bunch of times, slits his throat, and then shoots him. So really make sure that guy is dead. Like, he's dead, right? But Amber's not, and so she comes out and she's all burnt, and then they shoot her too. So now, both dead. So, at the end of all this, Sam, Tara, Chad, and Mindy, despite being attacked, they all survive. And then Gale promises not to write a book about all of this, and to write a book in dedication to Dewey instead, now that Dewey is dead. And we're done. And they all survive and live happily ever after. Until Scream 6, which came out this year, 2023. So in the intro to Scream 6, this one's probably my favorite intro of the series. I really like the first one just because of the originality of that one. You know, it was the first one, so it was something special. But out of like the whole franchise, I think I really liked this one the most. I will say about the 6th one, I liked it a lot until the reveal. The reveal of who Ghostface was ruined it for me, but I'll get to that. But yeah, I've been talking about these movies for so long now. We're almost done. Okay, so at the intro, there's like this university professor. She is like the film professor at the university that Tara goes to, and they're in New York now. Tara, Sam, Mindy, and Chad all moved to New York. Tara, Mindy, and Chad go to college there, and then Sam just came to like live with Tara because she doesn't want to like leave her. Now that all this has happened, she like doesn't want to be separated from her. So anyway, in the intro, the film professor is like sitting at a table. She's like waiting for her date who she met online. He ends up calling her. He doesn't sound like Ghostface. He sounds like a person, like a regular guy who's like, oh, I think I'm lost. Like, I think this is this a red building? I don't know. And so she walks outside of the bar. She's like, no, it's like this. Are you sure you're looking at the right place? He's like, yeah, I don't see the building anywhere. I was like, oh, is it across from an alley? I think I'm in the alley. And so she ends up like going down the alley, and he's like asking her about like film studies. And she's like, yeah, like the rules of like slasher films and like stuff like that. And so she's in this alley, and she's like, I don't see you anywhere. And he's like, oh, I think I see you. And she's like, really? Where are you? And then it turns to Ghostface's voice, and he's like, you teach about like slashers, and yet you went down an alley all by yourself. And so Ghostface comes out and like kills her. But then the interesting part, he takes off his mask, and it's this student. We find out his name is Jason, And so then we're following him as he's like walking back to his dorm, and he actually passes by Tara, and it's Halloween or like around Halloween time because everyone's in costume and Tara's dressed up, and he's like, hey Tara, are you going to that party later? Oh, is your sister Sam coming? She should totally go. And she's like, yeah, whatever, haha, and like leaves. And so Jason goes back to his apartment, and he's like chilling there, and then he gets a call from who he thinks is his roommate Greg, and Greg's putting on the Ghostface voice, and he's like, dude, don't do the voice on me. And he's like, why would you kill that girl without me? And she's like, oh, sorry, dude, like I just had to like, I was getting like murder blue balls, I had to just like try it out. But like I'll stick to the plan. And Ghostface is like, oh yeah, we're gonna kill the Carpenter sisters to complete the last movie that didn't get completed because they were supposed to die or whatever. And the Ghostface on the phone, who he still thinks is Greg, is like taunting him like, oh, just tell me what it felt like. What did it feel like? And Jason says something really gross. Obviously he's a murderer, so he's not gonna be a great person, but he's like, honestly, it felt like I was killing an animal. Like every time I stabbed her, she was less and less human. Like she was just meat at the end. It was exhilarating, bro. And so then Ghostface Greg is like, oh, I'm in the apartment, bro. You should come and find me. So Jason's walking through the apartment, and he makes it by the fridge, and he's like, dude, I don't want to play this anymore. And the Ghostface is like, but you're so close. And he opens the fridge, and it's like Greg's mutilated body. And then the real Ghostface comes out and like stabs Jason, and is like, do you feel like an animal? Do you feel just like meat? And previously he said something like, well, she wasn't meat, she was a person. And so that part of it, and then Jason's dead, that part of it I really liked. Because I was like, oh, sweet, this is cool, this is new. Like, this Ghostface is like, the new Ghostface is like stopping other people, other wannabe Ghostface killers who are just trying to like make a movie by killing real people in real life. You know, which is not how you make a movie, by the way. I don't know if anyone told these people that. I guess really what they mean is they're trying to inspire a movie, but whatever. And I thought that was going to be it. Like, there's a Ghostface who's like finding people who are trying to be Ghostface and like killing them before they can go on a killing spree. Or like getting revenge for Ghostface victims. And I was like, that's cool. And like, if Sam's doing that, where she's like giving into her serial killer, like inner serial killer, like instinct, I guess, or desires, but like using it for good, like a Dexter situation or something like that, that would be awesome. I would love that. That would be cool. That's not what's happening, unfortunately. Anyway, Tara, Sam, Chad, Mindy in New York now, and then we have some new characters. We have Sam and Tara's roommate. Her name is Quinn. And she's kind of a promiscuous gal. She's like shown sleeping with a bunch of dudes. And then there's Chad's roommate, Ethan. And then there's Mindy's girlfriend, Annika. So our characters and then our new characters, right? Sam is in therapy. There's like a rumor that started online that like she was the real murderer of the previous murders, and she just like framed Richie. And it got out that she's Billy Loomis's daughter, so everyone's like, you're a killer, and she's like getting like harassed on the street about it and stuff. And her therapist is like, this is too much for me, and stops being her therapist, and she's like, no one will help me. But because of this, Sam ends up getting accused of Jason's murder, and so she and Tara go down to the station, and Ghostface attacks them on the way, and they end up in this like bodega, which is the trailer, when he's like in there and like shooting people in there. And he ends up like fleeing, and they go down to the station, and they're like, okay, I guess you're not Ghostface because Ghostface attacked you. And at each of these murder scenes that Ghostface is doing, except for the first one, where Jason was the killer, a Ghostface mask that had been used in a previous murder is at the scene. So like the ones used by like Charlie and Jill were at one scene, and ones used by like I think like one by Robin was at a scene, and Richie's was at a scene, and it's like building up to like going back to like Billy and Stu's. So a different mask used in a previous murder is found at each scene, which is also cool because it's like an amalgamation of like all of the previous films, not just the most recent requel. And this is like the sequel requel. It's like all of them, which is cool, keeping it well-rounded, keeping it all related. That's why I had to rewatch all of the movies. Otherwise I would not have understood. And the Ghostface that called Sam before attacking her came from Richie's phone, which is important. And Richie, of course, is dead. But it looks like it came from his phone, his contact. Anyway, they're at the police station, and turns out that Deputy Wayne, who is interviewing her, is Quinn's father. And so they're like talking about who the suspects could be, and he says something like, well, Quinn's my daughter, so we can rule her out. And I was watching that and I was like, that's a very suspicious thing to say. And yeah, it will be important later. Spoilers. But an FBI agent shows up, and it's FBI agent Kirby. Hayden Panettiere from the 4th movie is there, and she's an FBI agent now. And she has her stab wound from Charlie in her stomach, and she's like, yeah, I've been through this before. This is above your head, detective. I'm investigating this now. Which is cool. I like that they did that, because obviously, you know, you always bring back like Sydney and Gale. And they actually didn't bring back Sydney in this one, which was cool. I was like, good, leave Sydney alone, let her live her life. She's like got like I think she had like a husband and kids now, because when we like talked to her in the previous movie, and so she's not in this one. She's not in the 6th one, which is good. Leave Gale alone. Bring in other characters. Bring back Hayden Panettiere. They did awesome. Still brought back Gale. She ends up. It turns out that she did write a book about the previous murders, even though she told Sam and Tara she wouldn't, and so they're like mad at her. And Gale gets punched a couple times in these movies. Like Sydney punches her in the first one, and in this one Sam tries to punch her, she dodges it, and then Tara punches her, which is fun. So Gale's back. All the Ghostface killings are being investigated, and Sam's therapist ends up getting murdered, and Sam's file is stolen from him, and then the whole group is like in their apartment together, and Ghostface kills Quinn and Annika, and so Quinn's detective father, Detective Wayne, is on the scene first, and he comes out and he's like, I've been taken off the case now that involves my daughter, but like he killed my daughter, there's no way I'm not investigating this, so I'm going to help you guys, to like Sam and Tara, to like find this guy because he killed my daughter, which he's upset about at first, but like as the movie goes on, like the next scene he's suspiciously like not acting that upset about it, which is interesting. I remember thinking that during the movie, because at first he's like, oh my god, my daughter, but then in like the next scene, they go to this abandoned movie theater that Gale found, because she's doing her own investigation, like I said, and there's an abandoned movie theater that basically has a shrine to like all the previous killings, all of the outfits and like masks that I guess they said that they thought it was like Jason and Greg's like lair, and there's like memorabilia, like all the knives that were used, the TV that killed Stu is there, like all the stuff from the previous like murders are like there, like museum style, and so that's where they're getting like all the masks to drop at each of the scenes. While they're there, like the whole crew's there, Detective Wayne is there, and they're like looking at everything, and suddenly he doesn't seem so upset about his daughter being murdered, even though that just happened. I would still be distraught if that were me, but you know, whatever. Not suspicious at all. So they find this theater, and then they all go off and they like make their plan and whatever, and Gale's back at her house and she has a boyfriend now, and Ghostface calls her, and this is the first time Gale has ever gotten a call directly from Ghostface, which is cool, and they point it out. And so Ghostface comes in, kills her boyfriend, attacks her. Tara and Sam are able to come in because they're like tracking her, because everyone's being really careful, because obviously like the legacy characters like are up for being killed, since like Dewey and Judy were killed last time, so obviously like Gale is not safe at all, and they find her, and she survives. She goes to the hospital, and she has this line like, tell Sydney like he never got me, which is like, yeah, he never got you, Gale. You're a survivor too. So after that, the group converges again together. Sam, Tara, Kirby, Mindy, Chad, Ethan are all together, and they like make this plan to like execute Ghostface by luring him into the theater, locking him into this like cage that's in the front, and then just like killing him. So all the kids are like on the subway to go, and they end up getting separated. Sam, Tara, Chad, they're all in like one subway, and then Mindy and Ethan are in a different subway car, and it's like Halloween, so everyone's in costume, and so there's like all these like characters, and there's a couple different Ghostfaces, and one of them ends up like attacking Mindy on the train, which is crazy how that can happen in like a public place. This is not the first Scream where that happens. Like in Scream 2, when Jada Pinkett Smith gets like stabbed in the movie theater, that was scary because like it happens in front of so many people. And in this one on the subway, she just gets stabbed, and no one notices until the train stops, and Ethan's like, oh my god, Mindy. And Mindy had been accusing Ethan this whole time. She's like, I can't believe I was wrong about the murderer again, because you were right there. You couldn't have done it. So anyway, the rest of them make it to this theater with Kirby. And Tara gets a call from Detective Wayne, who's like, get out of there right now. I just got a call from the FBI. Kirby was acquitted like months ago because she like went crazy or whatever. It's Kirby. Get out of there. And so she's like, oh my god. and they all realize that they're actually the ones that are trapped in the theater and there's no way out. And they all think it's Kirby, and Tara and Sam are trying to find their way out, and Tara's with Chad, and they have this like moment together where they're like realize that they like each other, and there was like chemistry previously, so they finally kiss, but then two ghost faces come out and stab Chad together, like holding him out like that, like stabbing him, and it's like brutal. And Chad's like, run, and Tara runs. And Detective Wayne comes on the scene and ends up revealing himself as one of the ghost faces. And then the other two ghost faces come out, and it turns out it's Quinn and Ethan. Quinn didn't actually die. They like switched out her body. That's why Detective Wayne was first on the scene, and also why he didn't seem so upset about her death. And Ethan, Mindy was right, it was Ethan. And it turns out that Quinn and Ethan are Detective Wayne's kids, and their older brother was Richie, Sam's ex-boyfriend, who she killed in the previous one because he was the ghost face. And so this whole shrine of like all the previous like ghost face killings was for Richie. He was like super in love with like the Stab movies and like the Woodsboro killings, and they like projected like a movie he made himself, like a fan movie, and he obviously got way too involved with it and involved in real life and started killing everybody. That's why he was like the previous killer. And so Detective Wayne and Quinn and Ethan are all trying to get revenge on Sam, which previously when she was getting the Ghostface calls, he was like, I know what you did and I'm going to punish you. And she's like, I didn't do anything, you know, thinking that this Ghostface was blaming her for all the previous murders. But really they were talking about how she killed Richie, which again, this is where I'm annoyed again, because this is the exact same like kind of motivation as Scream 2, where it's Billy Loomis's mom who's like, how dare you kill Billy even though he tried to kill you. It's like, they're literally saying, how dare you kill Richie even though he tried to kill you and your sister and all your friends. Like, she's allowed to kill him because he tried to kill her. That was his whole thing. His whole goal was to kill Sam. And if Sam hadn't killed him, Sam would be dead. So it's like, I was just supposed to let Richie kill me? Like, it was in self-defense. And yeah, she stabbed him a bunch of times and slit his throat and shot him, which was maybe excessive, but like, she gets to do that. It's fine. It's self-defense. It's fine. So that annoyed me because I was like, what was she supposed to do? You're mad because she didn't let Richie kill her and her sister. That's why you're mad at her. That's why you're getting revenge. And none of it was about fame. It was all three of them were just trying to get revenge for Richie. And I was like, guys, if you knew anything about these previous killings or these movies, the Ghostface killer literally never gets away with it. They literally are never able to complete their movie or whatever they're doing. So, like, why are you special? Is it because you're a cop and there's three of you? Whatever. And obviously it doesn't work out for them because this is a Scream movie and they all end the same. The Ghostface killer always gets revealed to want revenge and or fame, and then they all die. And that's exactly what happens. Sam ends up getting the knife that Billy used, and they're all like wearing masks from the previous ones. Quinn's like, mine's Stu's, he's my favorite, blah, blah, blah. He's like, this one's your father's, how do you feel about that? And so Sam like gets the knife, and her and Tara like separate in this moment of like, you have to let me go, Sam, you can't hang on to me forever, I can fend for myself. And Tara ends up stabbing Ethan like in the mouth, and Sam kills Quinn. And then Sam, wearing Billy's robe and using his knife, and ends up stabbing Wayne, and so Wayne's dead, and Kirby's still there. She gets stabbed again. I think she gets stabbed with the same knife she had previously been stabbed with, because they had the knife from Scream 4 that she was stabbed with, and I think it's Quinn that stabs her again, but she's not dead. She comes back, and you always have to have the Ghostface killer who we thought is dead come back. So Ethan comes back. He was stabbed in the mouth, but he's still alive. He comes back, and Kirby kills him with the TV that killed Stu in the first movie. And so all three of the new Ghostface killers are dead, and Richie's like movie that he made is like playing in the background, and Sam, Tara, Kirby, Mindy, and Chad, even though he got stabbed a whole bunch of times in the chest by 2 ghost faces at once, they all survive. And Sam, as she's leaving, has Billy's mask and then just like drops it on the ground and walks away with Tara, denouncing her serial killer father and inner serial killer instinct or whatever. And then the movie ends. And like I said, I really liked it up until the reveal. I thought it was good. I loved the intro. So like from the intro, I was like, okay, I'm into this. I'm paying attention to this. Who is the murderer? Blah, blah, blah. And then like I mentioned before, if it was where it was like a ghost face who was like killing other potential ghost faces, because there's always another one that comes up. So there's always going to be another one to deal with. It's just about like finding them or like getting revenge for like previous ghost face victims or something like that, because that would still stick with the theme of like getting revenge, right? You know, just twist it a little bit, which is what we need, you know, something fresh and not as formulaic, which they tried to do. They tried to be different in the 5th and 6th one, and those movies were objectively like good movies, but it was still the exact same formula of the previous Scream movies, just with like new main characters, which was cool that the new main characters like crossed over into the 6th one, and they're probably going to be the same main characters in the 7th one. It's probably still going to be about Sam and Tara and like Mindy and Chad, I guess. They call themselves like the Fearsome Four, the Fab Four, the something like that Four. And so they lived because previously it was the 3, you know, with Dewey, Gale, and Sydney, and then now it's these 4, I guess. But at the end of the day, they're just all end up being the same. Like, it's never a character who we previously saw. Like I was saying with like a ghost face killing other ghost face or whatever, that would be cool if it was Sam. that would be not necessarily unexpected, but kind of in a way. You know, you wouldn't think that it's like the main character, but it would make sense in a lot of ways because they're really building her up to be a killer, and so that would be like a really good payoff to that, I would have thought. But it's always like a character who has never been in a previous movie. So it was Sam, Quinn, and Detective Wayne, who obviously were not in previous movies. And you could tell because of what I said earlier, where Detective Wayne's like, obviously it's not my daughter. Okay, well now I'm thinking it is your daughter, and it was. And then Mindy being so sure that it was Ethan, then being like, damn, I'm wrong. No, you weren't Mindy, it was Ethan. But yeah, so that part of it, I was just like, that's boring. Like, when we got the reveal and they're like, we're getting revenge for Richie, I was like, this is bullshit. I don't like this. This is stupid and dumb. Because I can't blame craziness for this whole family. Obviously, Richie had something going on. But then also, his brother and sister and dad all have, like, the same thing going on. I guess just, like, psychosis runs in a lot more families than you might think. And they have, like, very warped senses of morality. Yeah, because like I said, if I had a family member who was like, who murdered somebody's friends and family and then tried to murder them, but then that person ended up murdering my family member, I'd be like, they had it coming. I'm not trying to get revenge for that. Like, I'm sorry they put you through all that, you know? But that's just me as a non-psychotic person, I guess. Medically psychotic. I'm not trying to be insulting to anybody. So that really annoyed me. I was just like, at the end, it just like ruined it for me. I was like, this is just like what annoyed me at the end of 2, and just always being like new characters. So I know the next one, we're going to introduce some new characters, and I'm not going to know which one it is, but it's going to be one of the new characters, unless they finally do something cool with Sam. But they probably won't. They're going to still play it by the formula. So that's what I was saying at the beginning of just how the Scream movies are just like so formulaic, and they try to be new and different. And they put it in New York this time. They changed the setting. They added more like cool, interesting, dynamic characters. But at the end of the day, it's a Scream movie. And despite their best efforts, I know exactly what to expect. And I don't dislike these movies. And I will watch the 7th one when it comes out because we know it's going to happen. Do I love the franchise? No. Am I going to rewatch any of these movies anytime soon? No. Would I consider them good movies? Some of them. Good franchise? Predictable franchise. Just like every other horror franchise, which again is probably part of the point, but like you want to be like, if you're going to be a satire like this, you want to be a little bit different and like go against the grain at some point, right? Like I would think so, but it's become its own thing since the first one that they probably didn't like account for, like being this successful and continuing like over 20 years later, you know what I mean? So yeah, I need them to do something different. I need it to not be as formulaic and something different beyond what they've already done, because they've been kind of pretty safe in like what makes them different, and always like being about that family lineage, like Star Wars. Like it's all about like who's related to who and whatever. And this one, it's like who's related to Billy either by blood or by friendship, or who's related to Sam and it all just goes back to Billy, really. Billy or Sidney. If you're related somehow to Billy and or Sidney, you're involved with the Ghostface killings, and it's always a new character who's like getting revenge or getting fame. It's always the same. It's always the same. And I'm just ready. I'm just ready for the next film to break out of that mold, you know? But that's really my only complaint. Like I was saying, like I don't really have any other complaints aside from like motivations and just that like same outline every single time of like intro, killing, reveal, blah, you know? But I think I made my point about it. That's just like the only thing that really gets me about the Scream movies. As movies, like they look good, they sound good, I like the characters, the murder sequences are good and appropriately gory. They really don't try to hide anything. I do legitimately be like, you know, there's definitely times like where I'm like, oh shit, like when Tara got stabbed in the hand or Ethan got stabbed in the mouth, and other times when people get like stabbed through the head and shot and burned and blown up, like those are cool. I like it, you know, I'm into gore, I'm into scary stuff, but other than that, it's, you know, they're fine. They're very, very well-made movies that are just fine. I don't think I've rated any one of them higher than 3.5, so, which is just like a little bit better than average for me. So I have a lot of hope for these movies. They could do something really good, and I'm just waiting for that to happen. Hey, it's Editing Raven. Something that I really wanted to say about these movies before the video ended that I didn't quite work in there during my end rant is that I really love Ghostface as a concept, like as an entity. The Ghostface killer, before he is revealed, when he's just Ghostface, that's legitimately frightening, not knowing who he is, and I'd rather not know who he is. I would love to have a film where we don't get a reveal. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but it's because it's kind of like the idea of like Michael Myers or Jason, you know, with that mask, they're not a person. As soon as they become a person, it's no longer scary. Everything that you have built up to that point is just gone. Like Scooby-Doo, like any Scooby-Doo reveal, when you realize it's just a guy, suddenly you're not afraid anymore, and you've defeated him. So you've taken away that fear. The fear that he instills in you is kind of like the biggest part of it. When you realize like, oh, it's just a girl, like it's just a teenage girl more often than not, or a boy or some weird guy, you're like, oh, okay, that's really not scary. And a part that I really liked about Scream 6 was when Gail was attacked by Ghostface, and she said to Sam and Tara, tell Sidney he never got me. And by he, she's referring to Ghostface as the entity, because in like Gail and Sidney and maybe in Dewey's mind, like across the other films, it's Ghostface the entity is always chasing them, and in a way he kind of possesses all these different people. I can't sing enough praises about Halloween Ends, because they really honed in on that specific concept, that Michael himself, Michael Myers, is not the villain. It's the evilness that possesses him that he is able to pass on to others. Specifically in that movie, he passed it on to Corey, and that was really cool. That's something that made that specific franchise, the Halloween franchise, so fresh, that they expanded on their idea. It's no longer Michael Myers the man, it's Michael Myers the entity. And that's what I like about Ghostface up until the reveal, is he is an entity. He's not a person, right? As soon as he becomes a person, one, not scary anymore because it is a person, but two, you know that as soon as Ghostface gets revealed, he or she or they are going to die within like 10 minutes. Like the next scene, they're dead. So once they're revealed, you know it's about to be over and the heroes are about to prevail, which just takes away any of that shock and any of that anticipation that we had built up over the past hour of the film. So that's why I say that I really liked the movie up until that point. I could say that for pretty much all of the movies except for the first one, because Billy and Stu were still threatening in the first one, and you didn't know if Sydney was still gonna make it out of there. But everyone after that, you knew as soon as we got that reveal, that person or those people was going to die in the next scene, if not the scene after that. And that's my biggest problem with the formula, is that they just eliminate any fear or anticipation or shock or suspense as soon as that mask comes off. So I prefer it mask on. It's just so much better that way. So just wanted to include that here. But that's it. I hope you liked my thorough summaries of each. I hope I hit the important points. I know there's a lot I forgot along the way, but there's a lot of info. And let me know what you think about the Scream movies, if you've seen them and if you agree with me at all. I don't know if this is like a controversial opinion or not, because I haven't really looked into others' opinions on the Scream movies yet, since I just so freshly watched all of them and I didn't want to spoil myself. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if there's like another series that you think I should watch like all the movies of. I definitely want to do other horror franchises, but if there's other like non-horror like films that might be interesting, let me know in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Thanks for watching, honeybees. Make sure to like and subscribe. Bye. Meow.